Now, typically the final boss is meant to be the game's hardest challenge. I mean, this follows pretty simple logic. I mean, why wouldn't the last thing you do in a game be the most challenging? And though they are sometimes tough in their own right, sometimes the basic enemies you come across on your way to them, well, they are even worse. Oh dear. So let's have a chat about them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game enemies we hate more than the final boss. Number 10, Insect Swarms, Resident Evil 7. Now, frustration is actually kind of the point in some horror games. Even in titles with fluid, responsive controls, you're still meant to feel constantly on the back foot, so that you feel that one bad move or one wrong corner turned can make you lose it all. But you know what? The Insect Swarms in Resident Evil 7, well, they take this to an entirely new level. Being a gross house, housing gross people and filled with gross things, naturally the Baker house has a lot of bugs. The most annoying of them are the bug swarms, and while they don't do much damage as long as you're just not standing there and letting them attack you, they heavily obscure your vision, and most of your weapons can't harm them. The only way to be rid of them is with a flamethrower, and even then, you have to attack their nest if you want them to stay gone. This eats through your flamethrower ammo very quickly, and it's this ammo that you want to treasure like it's water in the desert. While at the bottom of this list, due to them adding to the game's overall theme of helplessness, it's no shock that fans hate these things way more than they hate the actual bakers. Number 9, the Malboro, Final Fantasy series. Now, Final Fantasy loves to reuse ideas from game to game. Being a series whose every entry is fundamentally different from the ones before, it makes sense to have reoccurring elements to tie it all together, and this includes characters like the ever-present Cid, the names of spells, and indeed certain iconic enemies. But one that every fan dreads running into is the Malboro. Now, this is a mid-tier enemy in most Final Fantasy games, but it's a rite of passage for newbies, and that's because newbies always fall foul of its most infamous ability, Foul Breath. Now, Foul Breath hits you with every status ailment in the game at once, instantly turning the flow of the fight against you because now you've got no idea how to play defense while you undo the damage. It's an infuriatingly ingenious wildcard in classic Final Fantasy's random encounter system, but you know, it's quite low on this list because, hated as it is, players usually only fall for that trick once. Unless you're profoundly unlucky, it will rarely hit you with the Foul Breath right away. And once they're wise to the game, most players will make getting the Malboro off the board an immediate priority. Still, that hasn't stopped players from holding this tentacle nightmare demon in deeper contempt than most final bosses. Number 8, the Marauders, Doom Eternal. And the Marauders were an interesting idea for a Doom enemy. Lore-wise, they're sick as hell, being traitorous Knight Sentinels who turned against the Order to serve the Khan Maker. Making these Marauders souped-up demon knights with the exact same training as the Doomslayer is an awesome idea. You know what, print it, run it, put it on a bloody billboard. But gameplay-wise, it's also an interesting challenge for the devs, since this makes the Marauders into essentially duplicates for the Doomslayer, having to fight a guy who knows how to fight back. It's just a shame that this is where the execution kinda trips up. Everyone who has played Doom Eternal hates these damn things. The reaction time demanded of the player is sometimes too tight compared to how devastating the consequences for missing it are, as the Marauder zips across the screen and can only be hurt at certain times. It also has attacks that can counter almost every tactic you employ, and getting hit once, especially on the higher difficulties, tears valleys off your health. The Marauder was a neat idea, but in execution, well, it just executed you too much, and led to the Marauder overshadowing the Khan Maker themselves for the most hateable thing in the entire game. Number 7. Birds, Ninja Gaiden. When it comes to the annoying flying enemies of the 8-bit era, most people think of the Medusa heads from Castlevania, and look, no one here is saying that they aren't one of the most annoying enemies in gaming, but people are forgetting the final form of the Medusa heads, and that is the birds from Ninja Gaiden. The secret behind what makes these birds so annoying is all about their placement. The devs seem to have taken a truly sadistic pleasure in putting these damn things in the exact spot where they can destroy your entire playthrough in one swoop. Whether over bottomless pits or when you're already surrounded by enemies, expect to get pelted in the head by at least one rat with wings. Now, of course, we know why this is. Ninja Gaiden started as an arcade game, meaning that its priority is to drain your quarters. But that's cold comfort when you're playing it at home, and Tweety over here has knocked you down a fire pit. And it isn't like getting out of the arcades made Ninja Gaiden any easier. If anything, the game's actually got harder from there. Number 6, Prometheans, Halo 4. What made the original Halo trilogy's combat so damn good was the carefully designed variety in the Covenant enemies. it. Every single foe had clearly communicated tactics that complemented the others so seamlessly that when you put them together in any combination, the fight would be very interesting no matter how you cut it. Unfortunately, Bungie made their departure from the franchise in 2007, meaning that Halo 4 was due to be shepherded by a new team, and with Halo 3 ending the threat of the Covenant, a new enemy needed to be introduced to keep things moving. Enter the Prometheans. Now, the problem with the Prometheans is that they just aren't as interesting as the Covenant, based purely on one factor. There's only one race. The Covenant was made up of tons of different alien races, leading to a lot of visual and mechanical variety, but the Prometheans all look the exact same, so it does get monotonous. Plus, when they aren't being boring, they're flat out infuriating to fight due to their cheap tactics, the worst of which are the teleporting ones that incessantly dog you throughout the battlefield, leading to a ton of cheap deaths. The Prometheans were an interesting idea for a different kind of Halo enemy, being a collective hive mind instead of a religious cult, but the art design and gameplay mechanics, well, just didn't measure up. Number 5. Invading players. Dark Souls. When it comes to picking the most infuriating enemy in Dark Souls, one definitely has the pick of the litter. Through the game's intentionally wonky combat combined with the difficult mechanics and clever enemy placement, Dark Souls' enemies are a cut above the rest, even over a decade later. But to be perfectly frank, all of them pale in comparison to getting jumped by a guy who's just way better at this game than you are. One of the many reasons Dark Souls is constantly online is because if you connect to the internet while playing, you open yourself up to invasions. This is when another player can come in and just wreck your absolute business. It doesn't happen nearly as often anymore as it did back in the game's heyday, but honestly, that's sometimes even worse. At the game's most popular peak, it happened all the bloody time, which meant you had a good chance of getting some overconfident newbie you could handily beat and move on, but sometimes you get a player who would just absolutely wreck you so much that you'd probably just be left there sitting watching that bonfire flicker as you respawn, just going, can I actually do this? There is a league of difference between me and thee, and thus I cry. In short, you're dead. And now, you feel really bad about it. Number 4. Cliff Racers. The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Sometimes an enemy doesn't have to be hard to fight, they just have to be really, really annoying. And Bethesda has gained something of a reputation for having at least one enemy per game that just grinds players' gears. Whether it's Fallout 4 and the mini-nuke super mutants, or the Slaughterfish in Skyrim with their stubborn as hell fast travel ruining aggro, but when it came to Morrowind, there was only one that could truly be classed as the worst, and that was the Cliff Racers. Traveling into Morrowind mountains will inevitably cause you to cross paths with the nation's equivalent to pigeons. They're annoying and, worst of all, they are everywhere. And like the Slaughterfish, they never leave you alone. Except these guys can fly, so it's even harder to be rid of them. And the cherry on top, of course, is the constant screeching noise they make. And when there's a lot of them, which there always are, you better believe that sound gets real old real quick. They're not even the hardest enemy to deal with, and certainly not harder than the final boss, but these little freaks have cemented themselves in gaming history for being just so bloody obnoxious. Number 3. Tin Man. Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. The Igarashi Castlevania games prided themselves on their challenge. Starting with Symphony of the Night with its brutal difficulty spike in the second half, the handheld Castlevania games that followed did their best to make you fight for it. And hoo boy is that ethos embodied thoroughly with Order of Ecclesia's Tin Man. Ranking higher on the hate-o-meter than Order of Ecclesia's Dracula fight is quite the accomplishment, as that fight is easily one of the hardest and cheapest in the entire franchise. But at least you only have to fight Dracula once, as there's only one of him. Neither luxury is afforded to you with the Tin Man, however. This late game enemy hits hard and very fast, easily catching up with you whenever you try to get even the smallest shred of distance. They're made of metal as well, so most blade weapons will do nothing to them, and they're constantly spinning an axe in front of your face that takes entire chunks off your health. Oh, and if you do manage to get its health down, it starts shooting a machine gun at you. Sorry, how is this fair? But at the very top of this mini list as to why this enemy is so infuriating is that Dracula's castle has entire rooms filled with these bloody things. No escape and no mercy. That, unfortunately, is the Order of Ecclesia way. Number 2. The Flame Chariot. Elden Ring. It's hard to pick just one enemy from Elden Ring that is the most infuriating, at least when you rule out the bosses. Every enemy in this game can, and most likely will, kill you at least a dozen times. But the one enemy that most fans agree on can take a long walk off a short pier is the Flame Chariot. The main problem with these things is that killing them is tricky, because you have to find some way to get to the driver behind the chariot to backstab backstab them, and all the while you're getting either run over, doused in fire, or both. The only way to avoid all of that is to pull off a plunge attack from high up, but the odds of you coming across the perfect spot to do so are slim at best. Oh, and even if you do manage to kill them, you have to book it immediately or you'll die from the chariot violently exploding. Cool. And number 1, Cazadores. Fallout New Vegas. At the beginning of New Vegas, assuming you actually take the time to talk to the people of Goodsprings, you're told under no uncertain terms that taking the short, straightforward way to New Vegas is a good idea. And say hello to the reason why. Or technically the second reason, because that way, be filled with death claws. No. But yes, Cazadores. They're here, they're loud, they're vibrant, and they bring death swiftly. Because let's face it, the Cazador is the true hardest enemy in New Vegas, and they are wasps the size of your torso that move fast, hit hard, and leave a devastating poison that is almost guaranteed to kill you if the constant stinging doesn't get to you first. They're hard enough to deal with on their own, but unfortunately these nightmare beasts usually travel in packs. Your only saving grace is that they're incredibly territorial and tend to stick to mountainous areas, so if you run afoul of them, chances are you were wandering around some place you shouldn't have been in the first place. A lesson that will swiftly and brutally be imparted on you every single time you come across them. No boss in New Vegas inspires as much instinctual terror and raw hatred as the Cazador does.
Enemies and bosses play instrumental roles in the realm of video games. A run-of-the-mill grunt serves as a minor obstacle, allowing players to fine-tune the basics of their skills, while bosses test your mastery of the game's more complex and intricate mechanics. Not only does the defeat of a boss allow you to progress through the story, you're often gifted with new items or abilities. Although enemies and bosses can range in difficulty, the rule of thumb is bosses tend to be the biggest challenge. If you've gone ahead and checked the title of this list, you probably know that we're not talking about those cases. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are 10 video game enemies worse than any boss. Number 10. Exploder Necromorphs, Dead Space. In Dead Space, Starship engineer Isaac Clarke must eliminate reanimated corpses called Necromorphs. These The Thing-inspired revenants come in all shapes and sizes, each with their own unique abilities. Although Dead Space is a bone-chilling experience from start to finish, nothing encapsulates pure terror like your first run-in with an exploder. As the name suggests, this Necromorph variant detonates when approached, which often proves fatal. These malformed beasties tend to rush Isaac as well, which leaves you with really little time to react. Even if Isaac survives the initial blast, he's still not out of the woods, since the explosion can hurl you across the room, damage your suit, and destroy useful items. Isaac can dispose of the exploder by shooting its sack, but he can't get too close or wait too long, or the combustible beast will go kaboom. Exploders usually appear alongside other necromorph types, which forces you to prioritize them. Because if you don't give the exploder your undivided attention, it can easily blindside you. Despite the fact that Dead Space players deal with a lot of nightmarish nasties, exploders are probably the main reason they see the game over screen. Number 9. Polterkitty, Luigi's Mansion 3. Luigi's Mansion 3 has a pretty straightforward system. On each floor, the titular character needs to vanquish the boss and pick up an elevator button, which will allow you to reach the next floor. While trekking through the 17 stories of the haunted hotel, Luigi contends with a variety of bosses, including a haunted piano, a rampaging kaiju, a dinosaur skeleton, and a groovy DJ. And yet, none of those adversaries are as grating as the Polterkitty. Just as Luigi's making his way to the 9th floor, this scaredy cat nabs the elevator button and vanishes. With no hint where it went, the vacuum-sporting plumber needs to return to the previous floors, hoping to stumble upon the ghostly feline. Annoyingly, Luigi needs to track the cat down 3 times before it gives up the button. Like a real cat, I guess. The fight itself isn't hard, but that doesn't stop the backtracking from growing super tiresome. What's worse is that the paranormal pussycat pulls the same trick when Luigi ventures to floor 14. Once again, Mario's cowardly plumber hasn't a clue where the Polterkitty is gone, meaning you have to backtrack through up to 13 floors, 15 if you include the 2 basement levels. Looking back, there was no need to incorporate the Polterkitty, it just pads out the already long campaign, and it's not fun to chase. Number 8. Cactuar, Final Fantasy 15. When it comes to Final Fantasy, Tonberry and Malboro are often neck and neck in terms of overpowered enemies. But when it comes to pure annoyance, Cactuar may nab the top spot, especially the version that pops up in Final Fantasy XV. On paper, fighting this sentient cactus sounds like a good idea, since your party's rewarded with lots of XP if you defeat him, but that is a big if in that sentence. Cactuar puts up a hell of a fight, unleashing needle attacks that deal fixed damage. The pointy critters regularly disperse poison, which is extremely difficult to avoid, and he constantly boosts his defense, evades your assaults, and is heavily resistant to most attacks. Pretty beefy for a thing that's just an animated cactus. As frustrating as that sounds, it's not the worst part. Anyone hoping to defeat a bunch of Cactuars to boost their levels quickly have to track them down first, which is easier said than done. If you kill Cactuar, he doesn't appear again for a while, which makes grinding difficult. And that's if you win, since Cactuar tends to do a runner when things don't go his way. So even if you manage to find the thorny plant, you have to beat him before he escapes. Due to Cactuar's elusiveness, ferocity, speed, evasion, and sudden exits, it's almost not worth fighting him. Number 7. Medusa Head. Castlevania, the series. Castlevania has spawned many infamously difficult bosses over the years, including Legion, Death, and the Prince of Darkness himself, Dracula. And yet, the monster that's sure to give players the most heartache is the Medusa Head. The snake-haired Gorgon flutters around many levels on loop in most Castlevania entries, injuring the vampire hunter upon contact. The Medusa Head doesn't seem like a major hindrance at first, since she doesn't deal a lot of damage. But this seemingly normal baddie becomes nightmarish when traversing through areas with sheer drops. If you get hit by Medusa's head while jumping from one platform to another, it's likely you'll plummet several stories, forcing you to backtrack. Medusa's head also tends to lurk around instant death pits, so touching them can result in you falling to your instant demise. Unfortunately, there's no real strategy against these mythical creatures. Even though Medusa heads are easy to dispose of, another will spawn seconds later. As a result, you need precise timing to avoid these hovering noggins to make sure they don't take you out. Of course, that's easier said than done. When the area is infested with other enemies, obstacles, and rotating platforms, you've got your work cut out for you. Number 6. Gigantic Vermin. Hades. Throughout Hades, Zagreus must make his way through the underworld and battle an endless horde of demons, hoping to find the exit. Unsurprisingly, the doorway to each section of the afterlife is blocked by a boss. Sure, the Furies, Hydras, and Minotaurs are tough, but defeating them becomes second nature, especially after Zag loads up with the appropriate weapons and boons. However, one critter that never becomes particularly easy is the gigantic vermin. These infernal rats are irritating when encountered in Elysium, but the vermin in the final area, Styx, are way more aggravating. What makes these rodents so reviled is the fact that they keep releasing poison clouds, which sap Zagreus' energy. They often appear in groups in tight areas, which makes it super easy for them to overwhelm you. On top of that, their attacks are melee-based, so they charge and strike at Zagreus when in range. They usually launch themselves after burrowing when they're momentarily invulnerable, giving the defiant demigod little chance to chip away at their health. Even if Zagreus reaches the final boss, he probably won't win, since the gigantic vermin will have reduced his HP to almost nothing by the time he gets there. Number 5. Like, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Although Ocarina of Time is reasonably challenging, the majority of the bosses are pretty easy, including the final boss. That said, players tend to have more trouble with the regular enemies. Redeads paralyze Link with their scream, Stealth Boss regenerate their health, blue bubbles disable weapons, Wall Masters send our hero back to the start of the area, and so on. However, the enemy that gets the most flack is the ironically named Like. This tubular slug doesn't do major damage, but it does something a lot worse than that. If a like devours Link, it'll swallow his shield or tunic before spitting him out. These items are necessary in certain situations, as you can imagine, so Link needs to retrieve them immediately. The problem is, if Link doesn't defeat the like fast enough, it'll digest the shield or tunic, meaning he has to track down the equipment all over again, which is time-consuming and potentially expensive. Link can reclaim his stuff by slaughtering the gluttonous gastropod, but it's no easy task when the hero of time is in a room filled with likes, and while he's trying to retrieve his paraphernalia from a specific one, another one can swallow him up, stealing yet another item. Bosses like Phantom Ganon and Volvagia may be difficult, but at least they're not thieves. Number 4. Chozo Ghost, Metroid Prime. Metroid centers around a bounty hunter called Samus Aran, who was raised and trained by a benevolent race called the Chozo. When the Chozo died out, it was up to Samus to bring peace to the galaxy. But in an ironic twist of fate, Samus's mentors became one of her most infuriating enemies. Throughout Metroid Prime, Samus needs to square off against the corrupted Chozo ghosts. As soon as one of these phantoms appear, the room falls into darkness, which, as you can imagine, makes it pretty difficult to get a sense of your surroundings. The Chozo ghosts are immune to most attacks, which limits your tactics. The sinister specters also teleport, so it's hard to get a lock on them. Worst of all, they can render themselves invisible, like a ghost, I guess, so there's no way to target them until Samus picks up the X-ray visor. But even when you acquire the visor, the Chozo ghosts can still disrupt Samus's vision with their charged attacks. Not only are you blinded when that happens, you're unable to retaliate. Even though Samus has her work cut out for her when taking on space pirates, screen-sized monsters, and, of course, Metroids, tangling with her former allies is on a whole other level. Number 3. Mimicry Marcus, Resident Evil 0. Serving as a prequel to the original Resident Evil, 0 has Rebecca Chambers reluctantly allying with an escaped convict called Billy Cohen to take down Umbrella's latest batch of zombies. The survival horror has a lot of creative bosses, including a zombified scorpion, a bat, and a centipede. Even though those conflicts are definitely no picnic, nothing fills the player with dread like the Mimicry Marcus. This enemy is composed of hundreds of flesh-eating leeches that form into a humanoid shape. These blood-sucking horrors can elongate their limbs, so keeping your distance is ineffective. Rather than using conventional weapons against it, it's more sensible to stock up on combustible items like Molotov cocktails, since these leechmen are not a fan of fire, as you can imagine. That said, cocktails are limited, so you need to not miss when one of these creatures starts closing in on you. Even when this sinister adversary is fatally wounded, it's still not done. Just before the Mimicry Marcus dies, it wanders in the player's direction before imploding, causing heavy damage. These leech guys tend to appear in tight spaces, so it's difficult to avoid them when they go kamikaze. Just to amplify the tension even more, you always know when a Marcus is nearby since its presence is accompanied with a disturbing high-pitched operatic melody. These enemies will be the death of you many times over, so your heart is sure to sink every time you hear that shrieking ballad. Number 2. Big Daddy, BioShock. On paper, having Frank Fontaine serve as the overarching villain of BioShock does make sense. After all, he's been with the protagonist Jack since the beginning, so you're invested in him as soon as your mission starts. Fontaine is directly responsible for the city's downfall, which is why it's no surprise to learn that he does serve as the final boss. And yet, nobody in BioShock leaves a bigger impression than the Big Daddy. These burly mutants soak up an enormous amount of damage, requiring players to expend a lot of ammo, plasmids, and other resources to take them down. Their resistance to damage makes quick takedowns pretty much impossible, which forces you into longer and more dangerous encounters. Despite their vast size, the Big Daddy is deceptively fast, closing distance quickly and overwhelming players with its brute force. The Rosie version is arguably even more annoying since it can attack from a distance. Big Daddies also often appear in confined or hazardous spaces, so you're probably dealing with stuff like turrets and other enemies while trying to take these deformed henchmen down. Although you can usually avoid these battles entirely, you're incentivized to kill Big Daddies to harvest power or rescue the Little Sisters, which is a fundamental aspect of the gameplay. For this reason, engaging a Big Daddy is often a deliberate choice, one that a lot of players may quickly regret. Number 1. The Marauder, Doom Eternal. Even though Doom has a whole dimension of hellish adversaries, the Marauder from Doom Eternal is probably the worst of the lot. The corrupted Night Sentinel starts off as a sub-boss, which the Doomslayer faces in the 6th level. The Marauder requires perfect timing, since he can only be injured when his eyes flash green. If he's shot at any other point, he'll whip up an energy shield, absorbing the impact. Although that initial fight isn't easy, it's not terribly demanding. However, the gameplay becomes unbearable later when the Marauder becomes a regular enemy. Defeating the Horned Beast needs such impeccable precision that you can't really fight him alongside other demons. As such, you're forced to kill every other enemy first, which gives the Marauder ample opportunity to wail on you. Things go from bad to worse while playing through the DLC, especially when confronted with 2 Marauders at once. Just to make this conflict even more punishing, because why not? The Marauders team up with a Screecher, which is a demon that makes other enemies faster and tougher if slain. As a result, you need to hit the Marauders with everything you've got while avoiding the Screecher altogether. Due to the Marauders' unrealistic level of difficulty, a lot of players would say they'd rather fight the Icon of Sin or the Dark Lord again than have to face one more of these guys.